Hello and welcome to another episode of the RPG Fanatic Show. This episode is going to be about a Mana series game, or Seiken Densetsu. The game in question, Seiken Densetsu 3. But, here's the thing, I'm not going to just do like a review and use my scoring system for it. What I'm going to do instead is just talk about the game and why it is such a great game and what a big disappointment it really is that it never came out anywhere but Japan. So, let's dive right in and get to talking about this great, fantastic game.
Seiken Densetsu 3 is part of the Seiken Densetsu franchise, otherwise known as the Mana games to the rest of the world. Accurately translated into English, Seiken Densetsu means Legend of the Holy Sword. I speculate that the reason the franchise is known elsewhere as Mana is because of the Nintendo of America's censorship policies in place in the 80s and 90s pertaining to religious references in games. Longtime fans of Square's titles will note that holy tends to be translated by Square as white, such as the white spell in early Final Fantasy games. I guess Square USA's marketing team didn't think Legend of the White Sword would work so well in America. Odd, because honestly, when I was a kid, the first thing I looked for in a game was the promise that I could wield a badass sword in it, and it's weird because the word demon seemed perfectly okay. Anyway, a lot of fans refer to this title as Secret of Mana 2, due to it being the game released in the Seiken Densetsu franchise after Secret of Mana, which was actually the second game of the series, the first being Seiken Densetsu Final Fantasy Gaiden, or Legend of the Holy Sword, a Final Fantasy side story, for the Game Boy. Americans know this game as the Final Fantasy Adventure. Now, before I go any further, I need to have a disclaimer here. You're going to see English text in this footage, but this game was never officially translated into English. You see, I'm playing this on the ZSNES emulator, using a fan patch created by Neil Corlett, Lena Chan, Nuka Nuku, and Secret of Mana 2 Freak, all of whom are all-stars in the fan translation community, each of them having been part of several other notable translation projects. The patch was released on July 27, 1999, and I can take some pride in that I was one of the first to apply the patch to my ROM, so this isn't just a game I came across a week ago or something. This is a game that I played the hell out of when I was still a teenager, and I'm turning 30 this year. This isn't just a review for me, this is a retrospect. Now, I know I have always said that I don't want to encourage piracy, and I don't, but I'm kind of in a tough spot here. I have wanted to talk about this game since I started doing these videos 3 years ago, and Square has never given me an official release so that I could do so. And it doesn't seem that they are all that interested in this title, since we can't even get a re-release for the Virtual Console or something. So my hope is that by talking about this game, it'll inspire some renewed interest into it that leads to an official Square re-release which we can all legally play, and if such a release ever comes out, I strongly encourage you to support that release and buy the game. Seiken Densetsu 3 is hands down my favorite title in the Mana series, and after you watch this video, I think you'll understand why. As you can see in this footage, this is perhaps one of the most beautiful Super Famicom games out there. Graphically, it is on the same level as Chrono Trigger and Terranigma. The game's pixel art is very faithful to the concept art created by manga artist Noburutu Yuku, I probably just totally butchered your name and I apologize, who is probably best known for his involvement with the anime series The Vision of Escaflowne, but has also been involved in other games like Chrono Cross and Tail Concerto. A lot of the NPC character designs from this title were brought over to future games in the series, especially Legend of Mana. The music was composed by Haruko Kikuto, who had previously scored Seiken Densetsu 2, known to us as Secret of Mana. By the way, you've actually been listening to the music throughout this video. The storyline and concept of the game was created by Koichi Ishii, who in addition to being the creator of the Seiken Densetsu franchise, was also heavily involved in the development of several Saga and Final Fantasy titles. As discussed in one of my RPGology videos, he is notable for having invented the Chocobo and Moogle mascots. The game was directed and produced by longtime Square employee Harumichi Tanaka, so long in fact that he was one of the first employees of Square, having worked with Harunobu Sakaguchi on Square's first published game Death Trap in 1984, and he was involved in many of Square's famous titles, like Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3, and some of Square's infamous titles like Square's Tom Sawyer, which we'll have to talk about more in a future video someday, simply for how alarmingly racist the game is. Anyway, Seiken Densetsu 3 at first glance seems to play very much the same as Secret of Mana. The game continues to use the ring menu introduced by Secret of Mana, and while there are still limits on how many healing items you can have with you in battle, you're able to store additional items in a storage menu, though you are unable to use any item in storage during a battle. One very noticeable difference is that while Secret of Mana allows 3 players to control each character using the multi-tap accessory, Seiken Densetsu 3 does not support the multi-tap and instead is merely a 2-player game. That said, Seiken Densetsu 3 is notable for introducing several gameplay and narrative elements that have since become trademarks of the series. The first is the calendar system, where the game has a concept of time, and as you play or sleep at ends, the sun will rise and fall, which has a huge impact on gameplay. During the night, some enemies may be sleeping and certain enemies might only be available to fight during the day. Each day of the week is associated with a particular mana spirit that boosts the elemental power of various spells and attacks associated with that spirit. Additionally, certain events only occur at specific times of day, like the black market being available only during the night hours, or the character Kevin transforming into a werewolf to boost his attack power. Seiken Densetsu 3 is also the first game in the series to feature the character of the Mana Goddess, whose life is tied to the existence of the Mana Tree, and also introduced certain monsters like the dreaded Black Rabbite. Seriously, this guy sucks. The concept of planting seeds to obtain new items was also introduced here. Every inn has a pot which you can plant seeds into in order to obtain valuable items. This aspect became a large part of the next game in the series, Legend of Mana, as I discussed in the review of that game. And lastly, the charging of special melee attacks used in Secret of Mana was dropped in favor of building up a power meter by using normal attacks, and then using bars of that meter to unleash special attacks, and this mechanic has continued to be used in future games in the series. One gameplay element which didn't get carried over to future releases is the class system. Seiken Densetsu 3 allows each character to change their class twice in the game, one time at level 18, and again at level 38. The character is able to decide to go down a light or dark path each time, and this adds various elemental aligned abilities to the character. For example, the swordsman Duran can choose to follow the light to become a knight and gain a heal spell, or follow the darkness to become a gladiator and gain saber spells that align his attacks with certain elements. Lastly, when a character levels up, the player can choose what stats the character will raise, and some spells can only be learned when the character has a particular number of points in a stat. For example, the magician Angela needs a high intelligence rating to learn all her spells, and the thief Hawk needs lots of agility. Storyline-wise, Seiken Densetsu 3 centers around a war between multiple countries who are trying to break into the Mana Holy Land to obtain the Sword of Mana, for obtaining the sword will bless the wielder with the ability to have any wish granted by the Mana Goddess. You can choose to follow the story of any one of 6 different characters who take part in this battle for the sword. Duran, the son of the greatest swordsman in the world. Angela, the princess of a kingdom ruled by magicians. Hawkeye, a member of a desert thieves guild. Reese, the princess of an Amazonian tribe that lives in the mountains. Kevin, the half-human, half-beastman son of the king of the beastmen. And Charlotte, an orphan girl raised by monks and nuns at the Temple of Light. This brings us to another interesting thing about the game, the replay value. At the start of the game, you are asked to select 3 different characters from the list of 6. Each character has their own storyline that explains their motivations, though you'll only get to play through the starting chapter for the character you first selected, but you will recruit the other 2 characters you selected along the way. However, each character has their own starting chapter, and throughout the game has mild differences to the storyline the player experiences, especially when it comes to what bosses you fight at the end of the game. This means when you play through the game using a different starting character, you get to see the same events from different perspectives, and better understand the motivations of the protagonists and antagonists, and what is really going on with the war. Now you might be wondering, why was this game never released for the North American market, or anywhere outside Japan for that matter? There had long been rumors in the Mana fan community that a North American localization of Seiken Densetsu 3 to be released as Secret of Mana 2 was cancelled in favor of Squaresoft USA developing Secret of Evermore, a game that plays very similarly to Secret of Mana. However, an interview conducted by SuperNES.com with Brian Fedra, the lead programmer of Secret of Evermore, cast some doubts on this. According to Brian, none of the people whom Square employed to localize Japanese titles was involved in the development of Secret of Evermore, and Seiken Densetsu 3 might have been canned due to concerns it wouldn't pass Nintendo of America's strict quality assurance guidelines. guidelines that were much stricter than what they placed on Japanese releases. You see, Nintendo was still very concerned about the vulnerability of the North American console market. It had recovered considerably from the video game crash of 1983, but this was primarily due to Nintendo of America employing very strict quality assurance rules such as removal of adult humor, nudity, and removing certain religious symbolisms from games. Square was very familiar with dealing with these policies while localizing their Final Fantasy titles, at times having to completely remove Easter eggs and change aspects of the storyline to get a game past the review boards. Seiken Densetsu 3 also has some pretty serious bugs. For example, critical attacks are heavily glitched, to the point a player might play the entire game and never actually see a character perform one. This is rather problematic because some characters, such as Hawk, are actually balanced around being able to perform critical attacks. The evade stat is also broken, which causes issues for some characters who specialize in evasion, like Duran, when he goes down his light path and gains the ability to wear shields that improve his evasion, which is pretty broken. Yet another bug involves enemies who absorb elemental attacks, such as the Black Rabbite. It's possible that if your first attack is absorbed by the enemy at full health, this will cause an overflow error where the HP of the enemy becomes a ridiculously low number, allowing even a boss to be killed with a few hits. The worst bug is one which only occurs when you play the game on an actual console. During boss battles, or when you use a lot of graphically intense spells back to back, the game can literally freeze up because it is attempting to use more RAM than the console actually has access to. This bug doesn't normally occur on emulators because our modern day PCs tend to have way more RAM than the Super Famicom did. However, it's also true that many games with game-breaking bugs managed to slip through the cracks and got North American releases, so I doubt this is the entire reason. It seems more probable to me that the technical difficulty of translating the game to English was the main concern. Something that many gamers don't understand about localizing games is that a truly faithful translation from Japanese to English results in the game requiring more space on the cartridge. This is because the Japanese language is structured differently than English. In many cases, English sentences are much longer than Japanese sentences are, since many Japanese characters represent entire words or stand for multiple different words, and English words are composed of several different characters. This hacked English patch I'm playing on an emulator required some rather complex programming to compress the script, and I'm not even positive this will actually work on a cartridge. Now, I'm not a programmer, so I don't know the full technical details here on how the script was put together, but from my understanding, Square decided to handle the text in Seiken Densetsu 3 in a manner that they usually don't, and this caused issues when trying to bring it over to the English language while keeping the game's size at an affordable level for the cartridge production. What I do know is that a lot of Square's North American releases had their scripts hacked to pieces. Notable examples are Secret of Mana, Chrono Trigger, and Final Fantasy VI, in order to get the games to fit onto a cartridge for mass release. Whatever the specific reason, Square decided to not bring the game over to the North American market, or any market except Japan. In fact, this game has never been re-released in any form, even in Japan. Most of the Final Fantasy titles have seen at least 3 or 4 different re-releases for multiple platforms, but the Mana series is kind of neglected, and only the first 2 games in the series have seen any remakes. Which is sad, I think, because this is arguably one of the best multiplayer games that was ever developed for the Super Famicom Super Nintendo platform, and more people should have a chance to play it. So, this is what we'll do.
I'm starting a project. You know, Operation Rainfall was really worked out. Within a year, they convinced Nintendo of America to actually localize not just 1, not just 2, but 3 games. That's pretty significant. I mean, it's really hard to get through to Nintendo of America sometimes. So this is what I think. I think that we should start Operation Manafall. That's right, Manafall. And we're going to try to get Seiken Densetsu 3 not just localized, but re-released for a modern platform, like even so much as the Virtual Console on the Wii. Or, you know, for the PSP Vita or whatever. You know, something. Hell, they could even do a remake of it for the PlayStation 4, whatever. You know, just something new. Do a re-release of it and localize it for the rest of the world to enjoy. And fix the bugs, obviously, and make it so that you can play with 3 players and not just 2. Because really, that's how every Secret of Mana game should be, you know? 3 players. So, that's what we're going to do. And you can find the Facebook group for the operation in the links below. Another thing you can do is that if you go to the RPGfanatic.net website, you can actually find an article for the game. And if you want to show your support and put all your videos about the project in one central place, you can upload your reviews and your Let's Plays, your commentaries, your news even, about the title and about what we're trying to do here to convince Square that there is a market that wants to play Seiken Densetsu 3 outside Japan for modern gamers. So let's see if we can shine a spotlight on this title and get Square to, you know, give a little bit more love to the Mana franchise, because it definitely deserves it. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next episode of the RPG Fanatic Show.